I didn't start this war. I built a fence. That's it. Just a line of cedar posts and steel wire to mark where my world ended and theirs began. But when the homeowners association from the fancy new development next door sent their fake security boys to cut my wire and then tried to steal my land under the guise of community aesthetics, I decided a polite letter wasn't going to cut it. So I answered with 8,000 volts of legal Texas electricity. They actually thought they could drag me to court, ruin my name, and bulldoze my heritage. By the time the dust settled in that courtroom, they were the ones begging for mercy. I've lived long enough to know one simple truth. Peace never lasts forever. Not out here. Not on land that remembers more than you do. My name is Clay Banner, and this stretch of sunburned Texas dirt, every rock, every cedar stump, every post hole, has carried the weight of the Banner family since 1931. My granddad carved the first fence line with a borrowed mule and hands that shook from the stress of the Great Depression. My father kept the place alive through the droughts of the 50s, through cattle sickness, and a tornado back in '98 that took half the barn roof, but somehow left the old windmill spinning like nothing happened. And now it's my turn. 120 acres. Just wide enough to breathe in, just quiet enough to hear yourself think. Most mornings start the same way. I step out onto the porch before the sun clears the ridge. The air still smells cold at that hour, cedar, dust, and whatever the coyotes left behind on their night patrol. My boots find the same worn grooves along the porch boards, and my old dog, Duke, trots beside me, yawning like we're already behind schedule. By 6, I'm checking the cattle, tapping each water trough to hear if the levels dropped overnight. Then it's fence inspection, line by line, the same way my father taught me. Not because I expect trouble, but because trouble finds you faster if you stop looking for it. For most of my life, that routine was enough to keep the world at the right distance. The town knew me, the sheriff knew me, and the neighbors, well, the real neighbors, respected a man who worked his land and minded his business. But the world changed. Or maybe it just shifted a little north, right up against my gate. When the Clear Hill Acres development went up beyond my northern boundary, it rose overnight like a rash. Streets carved too straight, lawns trimmed too close, and houses stacked in perfect rows that never matched the curve of the land. They carved a road where cattle used to wander. They planted trees that had no business surviving Texas heat. And they filled those new homes with people who liked the idea of the countryside without respecting the reality of it. At first, I didn't care. Let them water their lawns and post their neighborhood rules about mailbox colors and acceptable bird feeders. None of that had anything to do with me. My deed was older than their entire subdivision. My land was registered long before HOAs were a glimmer in some developer's eye. Still, something inside me tightened when I saw that road built so close to my fence line. It wasn't fear. It wasn't anger either. It was that old rancher's instinct. The feeling you get when a storm's coming, but the sky still looks clear. So, I decided to proactively upgrade the northern fence. Not to provoke, not to posture, just to draw a clean, strong line between a world of clipped hedges and a world that answers to sun, soil, and sweat. I sank every post myself. Treated cedar with steel core, straight as rifle barrels. Ran the wire tight enough to hum when the wind shifted. Mounted solar cameras every 50 feet. Hung signs every 10 feet. Private property. No trespassing. Video surveillance. If a man can't understand that message, then the problem isn't the sign. By the time I finished, I stood back and wiped dust off my hands. The sun was dropping low, turning the whole fence into a copper line stretching toward the horizon. I felt something settle in my chest then, a kind of quiet pride. But peace is fragile, and some folks can't stand seeing a line they didn't draw. It started small. A glance from a passing jogger who stopped too long. An SUV slowing down to stare. A group of teenagers pointing at my cameras like they were props in a theme park. I ignored it. I kept to my land. I kept to my cattle. I kept to what was mine. Then one morning, I opened my mailbox and found an envelope so polished it looked like it was afraid of dirt. Cream-colored, embossed seal, addressed not to Clay Banner, but to property owner, Northern Boundary Zone. No return address, just a name printed at the bottom. Bradley Sloan, President, Clear Hill Acres Homeowners Association. I didn't know him. Didn't want to. Didn't need to. I stood there on my porch, holding that envelope, the wind tugging at the corner like it had something to say. And for the first time, I felt that storm I'd sensed weeks earlier begin to gather. Far off, quiet, but real. I opened the envelope, read the first line, and laughed out loud. A long, slow, disbelieving laugh. Because whatever war they thought they were starting, they had no idea who they were messing with. The letter was written in a tone that tried real hard to sound official. That kind of polished language folks use when they want to boss you around without sounding like they're bossing you around. It said my newly installed fence was non-compliant with the established aesthetic standards of the Clear Hill Acres community. It went on to say I was required to remove unauthorized visual obstructions within 30 days to preserve neighborhood harmony. Neighborhood harmony. That one got a snort out of me. There are a lot of ways to describe my land. Rugged, dusty, sun-baked, stubborn, but harmonious in the suburban sense ain't one of them. And it sure as hell wasn't part of their neighborhood. I ignored it. I figured it was a clerical error, a mistake by some intern who didn't check the zoning maps. But 2 weeks later, the second envelope showed up. This one wasn't polite. It wasn't even pretending. Bigger envelope, heavier paper, same glossy HOA seal stamped on the front like they were trying to make it look like a government document. Inside was a formal notice of continued violation. A whole packet of printed pages, paragraphs written like someone had swallowed a legal dictionary. It said my failure to respond constituted noncompliance. It said I was creating a public safety concern. It said the HOA was prepared to escalate matters. And tucked in the back was a small, blurry satellite map with a thick red line drawn around the northern edge of my property, as if it belonged to them. That part didn't make me laugh. I stared at that red line, then out the window toward the ridge, and a slow warmth crept up the back of my neck. Not anger, not yet. Just that rancher's sense again. The one that tells you a predator is testing the perimeter. So I wrote back. Not on fancy stationery. On a page torn out of a lined notebook. I wrote in all caps, partly to annoy them, partly because it felt right. I told them my land wasn't part of Clear Hill Acres. Never had been, never would be. I attached a photocopy of my deed and the historic boundary map that's been on file longer than every person in that HOA's lifetime combined. Then I signed the bottom. Clay Banner, owner. Independent as hell. God bless Texas. I mailed it off, and for a week or two, things got quiet again. The kind of quiet that makes you think maybe common sense has prevailed. But trouble, real trouble, doesn't knock on your front door. It climbs your fence in broad daylight. It was a Thursday afternoon when the first motion alert buzzed on my phone. I remember because I was knee-deep in mud working on a stubborn water valve. Duke barked once, just one sharp, low sound, and looked north. I pulled off my gloves, swiped the phone, and the camera feed popped up. 2 men standing right at my fence line. HOA polos tucked into khaki pants like they were going to a job interview at a lawn care company. One was tall and skinny, the other heavier set, both holding clipboards. That alone told me everything I needed to know. There's a certain type of man who uses a clipboard like a badge, like holding one gives him power he didn't earn. The skinny one was snapping pictures through the slats. The bigger one traced his hand along the top rail like he owned it. Then, I watched the larger man place one boot on the lower beam, grab the top of the fence, and start to climb. Didn't read the sign right in front of his face. Didn't care he was stepping onto private ranch land. Just climbed. Slow, deliberate, like a raccoon with a badge. I didn't shout. I didn't run out there. I just watched. Because one thing my grandfather taught me hard was this. Never confront a fool before you collect your evidence. So I saved the video, tagged the file, and moved it to a locked folder. They climbed back down 10 minutes later, scribbled something on their clipboards, and walked off. But a few days later, I found the first real sign that this wasn't just an inspection. I was checking the fence line and noticed the top wire cut clean. Not frayed, not broken by weather. Cut. Snipped smooth with bolt cutters right under the no trespassing sign. That did it. Laughing at a letter is one thing. Watching a grown man trespass onto your land with bolt cutters is an act of war. I called Officer Judson, a good man who's been policing this county since I was in high school. He came out, looked at the footage, looked at the cut wire, and whistled low. "This is criminal trespass, Clay," he said, tipping his hat back. "And property damage. These HOA folks forget where the pavement ends." "I know," I said, "and they're about to get a reminder." I knew they'd be back. They hadn't finished the job. So I set a trap. Not a dangerous one. I'm not a monster, but a messy one. I replaced that specific section of top wire with a dummy line rigged to a neon orange die pack, the kind banks use. Sure enough, at 12:47 a.m., the motion alert buzzed. Camera 6, infrared mode. A lone figure in a hoodie creeping along the boundary. He had the same build as the heavy security guard. He reached up with the bolt cutters, confident, arrogant. Snap. Then pop. On the night vision, it looked like a cloud explosion. In reality, it was a pressurized burst of impossible-to-wash-off neon orange dye covering his face, his hoodie, and his pride. He stumbled back, flailing, slipping in the dirt, screaming something that the audio picked up as, "Ah hell, he tricked us," before running off into the dark. Sheriff Hayes came out for that one. He watched the video and let out a long exhale through his nose. "Well," he said, "that there is criminal trespass, no question. Clay, these HOA fellas, they want your land, not just your fence." "I know," I said, "and they ain't getting it." The next morning, the Escalation moved from the shadows to my driveway. A black SUV rolled up, looking too clean for gravel. Out stepped a man who looked like he ironed his socks. Bradley Sloan, the HOA president himself. He walked up to my porch, looking around my ranch like he was measuring it for a sale. "Mr. Banner," he said, taking off his sunglasses. "We need to discuss an urgent violation." I took a slow sip of my coffee. "Morning to you too, Bradley." He didn't like that. He tapped his leather folder. "Last night caused a bit of concern. A misunderstanding with our security team. Trespassing usually causes concern," I said. He waved a hand like swatting a fly. "Let's put that aside. I'm here to propose something mutually beneficial. What if we take this burden off your hands? The northern strip, maybe 30, 40 feet deep. We could purchase it. $50,000, straight cash buyout. Quick, clean." I stared at him. $50,000 for land that had been in my family for nearly a century? And if I say no? His eyes narrowed just a hair. The mask slipped. "Well, then the association might have to continue filing safety claims, fence violations, environmental concerns. You know how these things can drag out. Lawyers get expensive, Clay." I reached into my shirt pocket and clicked off the small digital recorder I'd been running since he pulled up. "You threatening me, Bradley?" He forced a laugh, but it was brittle. "Just offering solutions. No need for drama. Get off my land," I said quietly, "and don't come back without a warrant." He stiffened, put his sunglasses back on, and drove off. But he left me with the final piece of the puzzle. This wasn't about aesthetics. It was a land grab. They wanted that strip for something specific, and they were willing to break the law to get it. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, the next morning, I went to the county building and saw Roberta, the clerk who knows where every skeleton in the county is buried. She pulled up the official maps, zoomed in, and confirmed what I suspected. The HOA boundary stopped exactly 43 feet south of my fence. 43 feet they'll never touch unless you gift wrap it, Roberta said, tapping the screen. "Print it," I told her. "Laminate it." I mailed a copy to Bradley with a sticky note that just said, "Stop trespassing." But I knew paper wasn't going to stop men like him. The paperwork phase was over. It was time for physics. That afternoon, I hitched the trailer and drove into town. I bought every grounded, state-certified Part 1 needed for a legal Texas agricultural electric fence. Insulators, grounding rods, a massive solar energizer, and a pile of yellow warning signs. Back on the land, I walked the northern boundary slow. I reinforced the posts. I ran the high-tensile steel core wire until it sang a thin metallic note in the breeze. I tested the voltage. 8,000 volts. Perfect. Enough to send a message that vibrates your teeth. Not enough to kill you, but enough to make a grown man cry for his mama. I flipped the energizer on. The low hum traveled down the line like an invisible echo. I posted the signs every 10 feet. Electric fence. Agricultural use. Do not touch. I barely had time to wash the dust off my hands before the test came. The next morning, my tablet buzzed. Camera 2. The same two HOA security boys, matching sky blue polos, strutting up to the fence like they owned the place. They hadn't learned. The skinny one leaned in, squinting through a knothole. The heavier one, the one who got dyed orange, apparently wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed. He ignored the bright yellow sign right in front of his face and placed a full, sweaty palm on the top rail to lean over. Zap! A crisp, Beautiful cracks split the morning air. The man jolted like he'd hugged a lightning bolt. His hat flew off, his clipboard went airborne, and he made a sound somewhere between a yelp and a dog whistle. He scrambled backward, falling over his own feet, clutching his hand. His buddy froze, dropped his phone in the dirt, and they both retreated like they'd just discovered fire. I saved the clip. I backed it up, and I smiled. But bullies like Bradley Sloan don't quit when they're stung. They try to burn the hive. The next morning, gravel popped under tires again. But this time, it wasn't just Bradley. A white van followed his SUV, sliding to a stop as a news crew hopped out. Channel 5 Action News. Bradley had called them. He was trying to shame me publicly, paint me as the crazy rancher endangering the community. He marched up, pointing a finger at the fence, playing to the camera. Mr. Banner has installed an illegal electrified barrier violating community safety standards. He is a danger to our children. The reporter, a sharp woman named Denise, turned the microphone to me. Mr. Banner, are you willing to comment? I looked at Bradley, sweating in his suit, and then at the camera. I surely am, I said calmly. And since Mr. Sloan here decided to trespass again to bring you folks, why don't we look at the video I sent your producer this morning? Bradley froze. Video. The one of your security team criminal trespassing and trying to cut my fence with bolt cutters, the reporter said, turning the microphone on him. And the one where you offered him $50,000 to make the violations go away. Bradley's face went the color of old oatmeal. That is a mischaracterization. Is it true you offered to buy this land to build a connector road for a future golf course expansion? I asked, loud enough for the mic to catch. The reporter's eyes went wide. The cameraman zoomed in on the sweat beading on Bradley's forehead. He stuttered. He waved his hands. He tried to backtrack. But once a man starts melting on live TV, there ain't no stopping the puddle. He stormed back to his SUV without a victory speech, leaving the news crew filming my perfectly legal warning signs. But I knew this wasn't the end. A man like Bradley doesn't stop until a judge tells him to. I called Daniel Torres. Daniel and I served together overseas. He's got a law degree, a dusty Silverado, and a pair of cowboy boots he calls his lucky boots for when someone is about to lose big. He came over, drank my coffee, and looked at the pile of evidence I'd built on my dining room table. The photos, the maps, the videos, the audio recording of the bribe. Play, he said, looking at the developer's sketch I'd managed to pry from a surveyor friend showing the planned road through my pasture. This isn't a fence dispute. This is premeditated expansion fraud. They want a feeder road for a golf resort, and they were trying to steal the land to get it. Can we win? I asked. Win? Daniel grinned, a dangerous look in his eye. Hermano, we're going to countersue for 6 figures. Trespass, property damage, attempted coercion, fraud. I'm putting on the lucky boots. The courtroom was packed. Clear Hill Acres residents filled the rows, looking stiff and whispering. Bradley sat up front, confident in his expensive suit, smelling like cologne and arrogance. But when Judge Evelyn Hart entered, the room went still. She's small, sharp-eyed, and tolerates zero nonsense. Their lawyer, a slick guy named Kellerman, stood up and started droning on about hazardous barriers and community trauma. Daniel stood up smooth as a sunrise. Your Honor, if I may, we'd like to present our evidence in logical sequence. He placed the laminated county map on the overhead projector. This shows the HOA boundary stops 43 feet south of Mr. Banner's fence. They have zero jurisdiction. The judge narrowed her eyes. Mr. Kellerman, do you contest the county records? Kellerman swallowed hard. We believe there may be discrepancies. No discrepancies, the judge snapped. The map is clear. Then Daniel played the videos. The night crawler getting sprayed with orange dye. The security guard getting zapped after ignoring the sign. The room rippled with laughter and gasps. Then, the kill shot. Daniel played the audio of Bradley offering the $50,000 to make the violations go away. Mr. Sloan. Judge Hart leaned forward, staring at Bradley like he was something she scraped off her shoe. Were you attempting to negotiate a land acquisition while fabricating safety violations? Bradley opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Daniel threw the developer sketch on the screen. And here is the motive, Your Honor. A road cutting through my client's land, dated 2 months before the first complaint was filed. Judge Hart removed her glasses. She looked at Bradley, then at the map, then back at Bradley. That is premeditated misuse of authority. In Texas, Mr. Sloan, we do not steal land with paper any more than we do with wire cutters. The verdict was swift and brutal. My fence was declared fully legal under the Texas Farm and Ranch Land Protection Act. I was awarded $135,000 in damages for legal fees, repairs, emotional distress, and punitive measures. The HOA was ordered to issue a public apology and was permanently barred from my property. And Bradley? The judge referred his conduct to the district attorney for criminal review regarding the attempted fraud. When we walked out of that courthouse, the sky was that bold Texas blue that makes you feel like anything is possible. The air smelled sweeter. Daniel clapped me on the shoulder. Told you the boots work. You did good, brother, I said. I drove home, the road unwinding under my tires, and when I pulled into the ranch, it felt different, steadier. Like the land itself knew it was safe. Duke greeted me on the porch, and I sat in my rocker, watching the sun slide toward the horizon. The fallout was fast. Bradley resigned in disgrace, untouchable by any developer in Austin. The HOA collapsed and reformed with actual neighbors who just wanted to live in peace. But the best part happened about 6 weeks later. I was walking the fence line at sunrise, the air crisp and cold, when I saw a man and his little boy standing by the wire. The boy was staring at the fence with eyes wide as saucers, holding a juice box. "Daddy," he whispered loudly, "is this the electric cowboy fence?" The dad laughed, looking a bit embarrassed when he saw me. "Yes, son, this is the one." I walked over, tipped my hat. "Don't worry," I said. "It's off for now." The boy squinted up at me. "Sir, did you really zap a whole neighborhood?" I chuckled, looking down at the wire that hummed with nothing but the wind. "No, son. I just reminded them where their neighborhood ends." The dad nodded respectfully. "We appreciate what you did. Folks needed to see someone stand their ground." We shook hands, and they walked off, the boy still chattering about cowboys and electricity and fences that made the news. I stood there a moment longer, watching the light hit the land my grandfather left me, the land I had fought for, the land that would stay banner land long after I was gone. The fence stood steady as a heartbeat. It wasn't just wire and voltage anymore. It was a promise, a line drawn in Texas dirt to prove that some things, and some land, are not for taking. So, if you're out there dealing with a bully in a polo shirt or a board that thinks they own the horizon, remember this. Verify your boundaries, keep your receipts, and don't be afraid to put a little voltage on the line. Because peace is precious, but respect has to be earned. If you enjoyed this story of justice served Texas style, do me a favor and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments. What would you have done if you caught them cutting your fence? I read every single one. Until next time, keep your gates locked and your powder dry.